All right, so basic run through of masks. This can be fairly rudimentary. We'll get more into masks in a little bit later, but I want at least to cover how you can combine masks together in different booleans, and really what a mask is in a fundamental way. So let's start with a new composition. And just a 1920 1080 is good. Let's bring this down to like just a couple seconds. We don't really need a whole lot of animation for this one, just for the example. All right, so here's a mask. We currently have nothing in our composition, so I'm going to make a couple additional objects. So I'm going to make a layer, new solid, make this orange so it's easy to see. Again, this orange is just a big shape that is the same size as my composition. So there it is, right? So I can mask this out, but normally this is sort of like a big, big filling shape, essentially. It's not quite a shape. It's sort of it's a square filled object. Just a flat plane. All right, but usually that's what we use for backgrounds. We can always go back to the layer and go to the solid settings and change our color here. Anything we like. Let's make it a little bit less aggressive. All right, but to mask this out, we want to add masks. By default, there's no mask in here, right? So we can add masks by a couple different ways. We can add a rectangle tool or ellipse tool or polygonal tool, star tool. I'll use an ellipse tool here. And I can put this mask inside of that. What I'm doing is I'm masking out a portion of this large shape. So I'm actually going to make another solid, new solid again. And this one will make a different color. And, boy, that's ugly. Put that behind here. Yikes, that's terrible. I don't like that color at all. Back in my dad's farming days, he used to call that brindle. I don't know if you know that term. Look it up. All right, so there. Not even that all that pretty either. Sorry, I really got to fix this color. This color bugs me. Kind of pukey brown color. All right, not much better, but at least it's something a little bit nicer. Okay, cool. All right, so there's that. So I've got the shape here, and that is in front of this other shape here. So what I'm doing is I'm masking this out. Let me make the composition settings here. Background a little bit darker so you can see the different shapes a little bit easier. Cool. So there you go. So you've got this shape here, which is just your basic background fill and your foreground fill. And of course, you can do the same stuff you can do in Illustrator with your foreground color. You can make this transparency with the opacity. Make that semi-transparent. This one here too, you can make that T. You can open up the opacity and have these kind of overlay each other a little bit like that. So there's that kind of possibility. So we can do that. I'll make this back to 100% again. Put it back to where it was before. And if you turn on snapping, by the way, you can have it snap to the center, which is turn to show grid and snap to grid. Get that to snap to it. Fit 100%. And turn it back off again. I think it's Control. Yeah, same thing in Illustrator. Control quote or the single quote mark. All right, cool. So we got this layer. It's a filled layer with a mask in there, and you can go in with the mask path tools. If you click away on the edge here, you can kind of activate one of these points, and if you click away and then back again, you can activate individual points. Those are vector Beziers. Holding the Alt key down, you can actually the Control key down on this guy. Control key down, you can break the handles. That's funny. The Alt key doesn't do that. It's the Control key on mine that breaks the handles. Strange. So you can break them. You can right-click on each one of these guys and go to the path style, which is next shape path. Hold on a second. I guess it's not there. Pulling the handles back in and making it a corner path, it's sort of odd. Oh, you know what? If you go to the path tool here, there you go. That does it. If you're using the path tool versus the selection tool, you have different controls. So Alt, clicking the button, will convert it to a corner path. There you go. So you can do that, and then Alt drag the points. So either if you're on this one, then you have the control point will work as an Alt, but you can't Alt click it and convert the points. This we can move them around, Alt break the handles, Alt click to pull the handles in, and then pull them back out again, just like in Illustrator. And you can also add points to it as well. Careful when you're animating, because if you add points, or if you have the path tool here and use the delete vertex tool, you can delete that. If you have animation on that, that will go away. And back to the pen tool. There. Cool. So they got that, and I'm gonna get rid of this path by hitting the control, and then that will give you the delete tool as well, just like Illustrator, I think. We can go into the mask feather and increase the feathering of that. So we have automatically a setup where it's feathered. And of course, mask opacity. Mask opacity is different than the layer opacity. They seem to have the same kind of effect. But if you see, if we combine this, we can make combine opacities together for interesting effects. Mask expansion allows me to expand out from the edges and back in too. So you can pull that in from the edge, which is kind of cool. I'll bring this mask feather back down to 0, and the expansion also down to 0. There's one other cool control here in this pen tool. If we go down to mask feather tool, or G, we can click anywhere on this edge and pull out the feather like this. This is separate from the feathering here, so be aware of that. But I've got this handle here that allows me to feather this mask out. If you ever use Nuke, or VFX students use Nuke, and they have the same kind of feathering tool. This is very important for rotoscoping. It's called a rotopen tool. So if I click on this edge here and I pull this in, I can adjust the feathering from smooth and feathered to tight and creased. So back out here, I can pull this out again. I can pull this in again. And especially if you're making amoeba shapes that are animated around, this can give you a lot of cool control. So again, much more subtle kinds of effects. I think it's really one of my favorite kinds of things. So you can have areas where it's sharp, areas where it's blurred. So creating motion blur, for example, you can have motion blur in any direction you want to. Really, really cool stuff. So going back to here, clicking on the edge, again, with the mask feathering tool, or G, I can play with these guys as well. That's really important when you bring in images. Before we do that, though, I'm going to bring in another mask. So instead of I'm not going to make a new layer. I'm going to work on the same layer, this pale gray royal blue solid layer. I'm going to go in there with another pen tool, or I can use a pen tool here, or I can just again use another ellipse tool or a square tool, either way. If I click way over here, or even in here, off the edge, I can drag another set of controls and have another mask. So I'm masking the same layer currently with multiple tools. Now, be aware that the initial shape, the initial object that I had before is now fairly well contracted. So this royal gray blue solid here, hasn't been scaled in at all. It just sort of kind of needs to be addressed here. So go to the transform tool. I'm going to set this back to its center. So transform reset, we'll set it back to where it sort of is in the center again. So the pivot point is right center from there before. If I move this around, you see I actually moved the pivot point offset from where it was before. So I'm going to hit reset, and then I'm going to grab the actual mask objects, which are all these guys here. If I grab the mask and control click mask 2, I can move them around relative to that shape. So it's kind of important to kind of think about. I can move the mask separate from the transform of the shape, the overall fill layer. So that's the pivot point right there that signifies the center of that whole entire layer. If I turn the mask off, for example, by bypassing that, or I may actually hit invert here. So I can actually invert these masks out. That's the boundary point of that overall shape, and it's centered again. Before it was like this. So when I was moving these masks around, turn off invert a second. When I was moving these masks around, I was coming to the edge of it, and I'm not seeing the entire edge of that fill shape. So that's because the boundary was there. So again, just hit reset. That resets the position of the overall layer, and then I can go back into the masks separately and move them around anywhere I want to. Cool. Hopefully that's not too confusing. There's no shape. There's no scaling of these masks, so you have to kind of come in and move them by their mask handles. Again, grab the entire mask itself, which is like mask 2, and pull them around. And there might be a tool that we can use to scale it. You can rotate them. If I go to mask 1 here and I do this rotate tool, I can rotate this guy. But it actually rotates the entire layer. I think we're sort of limited by, again, these masks handles, which is kind of limiting, but I think you'll get used to it. So in some cases, like shapes, it's easier to just animate the overall shape with the transform tools down here. And sometimes it's easier to override and do it this way as well. So it kind of depends on the situation. These are great for morphing and blending in cool, interesting ways. So I'll turn invert. Now I'll get to the invert here in a second too. So any one of these shapes I have, like this first one, if I do the first one, I invert that, I'm actually masking out and cutting a hole through the shape. And this one, and they're both add, by the way, and mask number 2, I am filling that back in. That's not inverted. I'm actually filling this area back in. So that's a possibility. I could also go the other way around, and this one would be filled, and this one would be cutting out, and this one would be filled back in. There, like that. So I can turn both of those off, and they can both be additional. I'm going to give this one a little bit of a feather so they look like they belong to each other. This one, instead of add, I'm going to subtract. So this one will subtract one from the other. So that I have a fill shape, I can cut into it with this guy. And that can be pretty useful. If you have type the letter P, in fact, or O, there's actually a fill shape and a cutting shape inside of it. So if I take a letter like P and I can actually type that in, convert that to a shape, essentially what you have is this. This is your letter P. Let's bring this handle here down further. Essentially, it's that sort of shape. That's what that is. It's a compound shape. But you can get really cool, interesting, and fun stuff with that, just by adding and subtracting and knowing what you can do with different combinations. And again, if I just put another rectangle tool on top of this, that by default is adding in, and they start from the top down and they move their way down. So this one's adding, but I can subtract that one out, so I can cut away at again to make it more interesting or more complex shape. I can copy and paste it too. So mask number 3 is now mask number 4. No, I can't do that actually. There's no copying and pasting masks. Bummer. Well, we'll just draw another mask inside of that one. That's going to be adding in. So this one's add. So subtract, add. Combinations of subtracts and adds give you the final result. So I'll feather those because it's nice to have feathering going on. And there you go. So you can make very complex combinations of shapes. And the one last thing too is if I just put in a quick drop shadow on top of this drop shadow will work. Perspective. That will work on top of the whole thing. And I will just offset the distance there. That will combine to work with all those different layers as well. So I'm going to pull the blur down a little bit, increase the opacity, take the feather away a little bit so you can sort of see what's going on there. Don't tell Kieran I showed you how to use the the drop shadow tool. It's overused in the industry, so he will probably excoriate you for doing so. So that's you know, you can give that sense of three-dimensional effect with drop shadow. Again, be careful. I'm not a big fan of drop shadows myself, so. But that works with us cutting in and cutting out. Addition and subtraction. If you do a drop shadow, put it very, very light. 20%, no more. Cool. All right, so that's fundamentally it. And I'm going to come back with the next video and show you how to combine this with images to do cutouts. So real super simple stuff. And then I'll show you the puppet tool because it's kind of fun too. Once you cut something out, you can use a puppet tool. The mesh you create from the puppet tool actually works really nicely with it. So yeah, let's go do that in the next video.